In today's video, we are going to be covering some tips and tricks that I have learned on how to build custom trees in Minecraft, and then I will be sharing 24 different designs with you that you can use in your own world. Let's get started. For today's video, we are going to be working in this area which I have put together, and you can see the spots in the ground where I have marked out where we are going to place in the different designs for trees that I've come up with. But before we get to that, we are going to first cover some basics on how to build a custom tree in Minecraft. The first step in building a custom tree in Minecraft is to find a reference image, and that is going to be helpful for a couple of different reasons. The image is going to tell you details on what types of blocks to use for the trunk, the types of leaves that can be used for the crown, as well as the general shape for the tree that you're going to be building. And there are a lot of sites out there that you can use to find reference images. You could use Pinterest, you can use Google, you could use YouTube, Wikipedia, the list goes on. For today, we are going to be using Google Images, and if we go to the search bar, we can type in oak tree, and as the results come up, you can see there are a lot of different pictures here that we can take a look at. So if we pull out 3 images, we can start to identify the basic characteristics of an oak tree. We can see that an oak tree will have a really thick trunk. The branches are also going to be very thick, and that the crown is going to be both tall and wide, as well as being dense in some places, but thin in others. Now that we've used a reference image to identify the main characteristics of an oak tree, we can move on to step number 2. Which is picking out the blocks that we are going to use to build it. And for the trunk, we are going to use 2 different blocks. We are going to use oak logs and stripped spruce logs, which blend together very nicely. And for the leaves, we are going to use a combination of 3 different ones. So we have oak leaves, which is going to be the main leaf block that we use. And then we are going to use some azalea leaves to highlight the tops and sides of the tree. And then to blend those 2 together, we are going to use jungle leaves. We are now ready for step 3. Building the tree trunk. For this oak tree, the trunk is going to be short and thick, and I think the best way to start is to just put in a bunch of blocks, and then once we have a lot of blocks here, we can start to whittle away at it to make it the shape that we want it to be. So we now have the basic shape of the trunk down, and now it's time to start adding in the stripped spruce logs, because this is going to help break up the oak texture and add a little bit more variety to this trunk. And once we get the trunk to a place where we like it, we can start adding in the branches. And if we keep in mind the reference images, these branches are also going to be really thick, at least starting out, and then they're going to kind of branch out in just a general direction like this, and we'll want to take them up a little bit, but they're going to be mostly going out at an angle. We don't want them to be going straight up. One thing to keep in mind while building the branches is that these don't have to be a perfect shape. In fact, it's probably better not to make it geometric, because if you have a repeating pattern in it, it's going to make it seem less natural. So it's important to make sure that you do not do the same thing over and over while doing the branch. Otherwise, it's not going to look like a real branch. For a tree this size, I think 4 branches is going to be just enough. We could probably add in 1 or 2 more, but that might make it a little bit too busy. But now that the trunk is completed, we are ready for step 4. Building the crown. One thing that I found to be really helpful when filling in the leaves for a tree is to create an outline for where the crown is going to end up at. And while these are made out of leaves, we are not going to make this be the exact shape. This is just to give us a guide to follow when we start filling in the actual leaves. For example, for this branch, we can go around and put in the leaves here, which are going to be making up this side of the branch. And while we have added in the leaves around where this branch is going to go, we are not going to have it go all the way up to the outline, and we will actually remove some of those leaves because we don't want it to be like an exact circle around the tree. And then what we will do is add another little bunch of leaves on this side to just fill it out towards this end right here. And then it's going to go around in a circle like this and fill in as if there were another branch here, even though we aren't going to be building an actual branch. But by doing that, we are going to not only be able to fill in the shape of the tree that we want, but it's also going to help us to replicate the lumpy look that we saw in the reference pictures. And it's definitely going to make more sense as we go along. And now that the first layer is in, it's starting to make a little bit more sense how we are going to fill in the space around where the guidelines are, but we are not going to be following it perfectly. So you can see with this guideline here, where it would have gone down, we didn't have the leaves going exactly straight up to where this one is. But over here, it does go up, and it went out a little bit further than where that guideline was. Adding in the rest of the leaves is going to basically be a repeat of that process all the way to the top. And to start off this next level, what we are going to do is just come up to a spot like right here. We are going to build up a few leaves just to get to a right level. I think that's going to be pretty good. And this is going to mark the outer side of where the next group of leaves is going to go. So you can now see from a distance, we have a pretty good crown going here, but there are a lot of little details that we still need to do. For example, right here, you can see it looks like we have just a line coming down there. So we are going to want to fill in a few more leaves just to kind of help break that up a little bit. And if we do that along here, then if we step back, it looks not quite so flat on that side right there. We are also going to want to connect up some of the leaves down here underneath the branches. That way it looks like these are a little bit more connected, but we don't want to add so many leaves that we block up the space completely. We want it to be mostly open in this area as well. It's also good to add a few leaves coming across towards the center in the middle of this space, so that when you look up through the tree, it's not just one big hollow space. But now that we have the main bulk of the leaves in place, we can start adding in some of our accent leaves. So we can go through and just replace a few with the jungle leaves. And then along the outside, we can also start adding in some of the azalea leaves as well. And with everything now completed, we have a nice oak tree that we can use. So far, we've covered the basics on how to build a custom tree in Minecraft. Now let's take a look at some other designs that I've come up with using this method. Let's start off with some small trees. So right here, we have a small acacia tree, and it's going to be made out of acacia leaves, birch leaves, and spruce fences. Next up, we have a birch tree, and for this one, we are using a combination of spruce leaves and birch leaves, as well as diorite walls for the trunk. And I think this type of design would go well on a city sidewalk along a street. Another tree that works well in a city environment is a cypress tree, and this one uses mud brick walls and spruce fences to create a little variation in the width of the trunk, and then it uses spruce leaves and birch leaves for the leaves on the tree. This next tree is based on a kapok tree, and for this, we are using acacia wood, tough walls, and spruce fences for the trunk. And then for the leaves, we have mangrove leaves, jungle leaves, as well as azalea leaves. Earlier in the video, we built this large oak tree, and the next design that we have here is a small oak tree. And once again, we are using mud brick walls because these are the only walls that are brown. And then we have oak fences for the rest of the trunk. And then we've got oak leaves, azalea leaves, and jungle leaves. Next up, we have a small pine tree, and for this one, we are using spruce leaves, birch leaves, and acacia leaves. And those three leaves blend together very well. And our last small tree is going to be a willow tree. For this one, we are using mangrove leaves because I think they have some good vertical lines, which is what you're going to see in a lot of willow trees. We are also using vines to create the willowy effect. And then for the trunk, the best that we have for gray is going to be tough walls, and that's a nice gray texture for a tree. But that's enough for the small trees. Let's move on to some medium-sized trees. And our first tree that we are going to look at is once again going to be an acacia tree. And one thing that you are going to notice if you look up acacia trees that's different from the real life versus what's in Minecraft is that the trees are going to have not only a split trunk, but they are also going to have a lot of branches underneath, as well as a main single canopy across the top where all of the leaves are going to be. So I tried to replicate that here with this design. Next up, we have a birch tree. And for this design, because it's a little bit bigger, we are able to fit in the birch logs here. We are still using the diorite walls to add a little bit of variety in the shape, as well as for the branches up in the crown of the tree. Next to the birch tree, we have our medium-sized cypress tree, and this one is using stripped spruce logs as well as spruce fences in the middle, just so you can see the trunk going all the way up to the top, and you can see the similarities in the design between the medium size and the small size. So over here we had the small kapok tree that I did before, and then this one is going to be a larger version of that. And the kapok trees are found in a rainforest, and this one definitely has a lot more detail than some of the other ones that we've done. We've got some spruce trap doors to just add a little bit of variation in the trunk. We've got mud brick walls up for the branches, and then down at the base we have tough for the roots. And even though it's mostly a straight trunk, everything that's been added to it helps to keep it from looking unnaturally straight. Next up, we have a medium-sized oak tree, and I think you can see with this design how this type of tree might grow into that type of tree. Next up, we have a pine tree, and for this one, we've got the same combination of leaves that we used for the small one. So there are spruce leaves, birch leaves, and acacia leaves, but we are primarily using spruce leaves for this one because it's a little bit older. And then for the branches, we have spruce fences. And the last tree that we are going to look at in the medium tree series is once again going to be a willow tree. And for this one, I am standing a little bit further back because as we get up closer, you can see the string here, which is used to keep the vines from growing all the way to the ground. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like it's good because we don't want all of the vines to be the same length, but at the same time, when you get close, it's very distracting. But once we get underneath the tree, you can see what we are doing here for the trunk. So we've got mostly acacia wood for the trunk, and then we are using some of the tough blocks to add just a little bit more angle to it and smooth it out a little bit. One detail that's a little hard to tell because of everything that is hanging down here is that the tree leans over to the left. And one reason for that is if you look at a lot of willow trees, they are growing next to pools of water and they are often leaning over it. So I tried to incorporate that in the design here as well. So far, we've looked at 7 small trees, we've looked at 7 medium trees, and as you might guess, we now have 7 large trees to look at. One benefit to working with larger trees is that you can add in even more detail. So for this acacia tree, we can see here, we've got a lot more branches with the spruce fences, as well as the stripped spruce logs. And then we've got the overall crown, which has got much more of an angle that you're going to see in real life acacia trees. When I was looking at the reference images for birch trees, one thing I noticed for the larger trees is that you would either have a bunch of trunks that split off from one at the base, or it was a bunch of trees growing closely together. And I tried to duplicate that here using diorite walls, as well as the birch logs here. And while it's a little muddled down here at the bottom, once you get up to the top, it works out really well. Next to the birch tree, we have a large cypress tree, and this is one that you probably are familiar with if you watched my other videos. This is one I use in my city all over the place. And while there are some trees like the birch tree over here or the oak tree that we built, where the center is not going to be completely filled with leaves, for the cypress tree, especially if you start looking at some of the pictures, these are very dense trees, and I tried to replicate that here. So there's very little in the way of openings in the middle of this tree, a lot of leaves, and then we've got some fence posts in the middle just to break it up a little bit. Next up, we have the kapok tree, and while there are a lot of the little details in the medium tree, in the large version, the details really start to come together. So down here at the base, we've got the roots providing a strong base for the tree. Then up at the top for the branches, we've got mud brick walls, spruce stairs, spruce slabs, and those work really well for the little branches underneath, as well as the support for the larger branches up in the main crown of the tree. And if you've been following along with some of my other videos, you may have an idea of where these trees might appear in the future. Next up, we have an oak tree, and there's not much more to say about it than I've already said, since this was the basis of the one that we did over here. The only thing I will mention is that the one that I built here is actually bigger than this one. And now that I look at the one that we built earlier, I think the crown of that one turned out a lot better than the one that I did over here. Next up, we have a pine tree, and for this one, we used the spruce fences for the branches, just like I did over here for the medium size. And the main difference between the large tree and the medium-sized tree is just the size of the trunk. Because once again, if you were to go and look at a bunch of images of pine trees, you would notice that the larger they get, the fewer leaves that are down here at the base of the trunk, and the more they are up at the top. And the last large tree that we are going to look at is the willow tree, and just like I did with the medium one, you can tell this one has a slight lean to it where it'd be leaning over a pool of water. I also was using the string to keep the vines from growing, and I think once again, it's better to look at it from a distance because up close, the string will get a little bit distracted. So far, we've looked at 21 different tree designs, and we have 3 more to go. For these last 3, we are going to go in a slightly different direction than what we've done before. Our last 3 designs here are some fruit trees. So we've got a plum tree, an orange tree, and an apple tree. And the idea of using candles for fruit on leaves is something that I saw one of the members on the Project Nodinium server use, Frostoid, and I've included a link in the description down below to his channel, so definitely check that out. But the way to do this is you first have to place a block, like a grass block, that you can place the candles on, and then you take that block away and put the leaves underneath, because you aren't able to put candles directly onto a leaf block. And I think that is all of the trees that we are going to take a look at today. In the description down below, you will find a link to a world download if you want to use any of these trees. Definitely check it out there. But otherwise, that's going to do it for today. If you enjoyed today's video, please leave a like. If you want to see more, please subscribe. And until next time, see ya later.